Good morning, this is Ken Long with a debriefing on our True Storytelling Workshop session number 3 with Dr. Boji and the gang from July 6, 2020, third session out of 4. So I want to talk through a couple exercises that we did and the connection to some of the larger material. So Ken and Lena were working together in a two-person breakout session where the task was to exchange stories, and we had a 6-part process that we were practicing that would allow us to systematically work through a restorying and an externalizing of one of the characters in that story. So briefly, to make progress in that process, you find a compelling story and you find what the problem was with yourself that you wanted to work on, or the situation. And then you recharacterize the drive that led to that as a character external to you who is part of that story. And that gives you the ability to stand off and kind of observe from a different angle and to explore and analyze and assess that problem. And then you work through your history to find significant others who might say something about you that could introduce a change. And then you explore how that change might then be applied in that story and might lead to maybe different outcomes. And you imagine how that might be used in the future, and then you develop a strategy to carry forward a new form of that story in a new circumstance, and in that way you nudge towards different future realities. So Lena and I did that. We exchanged story number 1 and then asked questions, and then we exchanged story number 2, and then I asked the questions of her, and then from that we had a chance to observe what it was like to go through that 6-step process. We then went back to the large group session, talked about our experiences, and then went into exercise number 2 after a moment of personal reflection. So in that moment of personal reflection, Lena and I both identified a common theme in our mutual stories: relaxation, empowering others, and trusting others. Now, we didn't say that in exercise 1 because we were narrating the stories. But when we came back together and we were proceeding into exercise number 2, we both had picked 2 of those 3 words about relaxing and empowering, and from that we derived the 3rd element of the seed of trust. It was interesting that that was the case. So we started exercise 2 beginning with that seed, and from there we were to develop a plan for how to proceed in the world this next week and apply the insights from the exercise 1 reflections. Well, we both had decided that we were going to actively and intentionally and by design use the seeds of relax, empower others, trust them in the process, in a way to intervene in a situation we were working on in each of our own lives, in our professional practice. Patricia joined us, and she hadn't heard the first round of stories, and so we just started with that seed and asked her if she had ever had experiences with the idea of relaxing and empowering and trusting, and she related a personal story, and we were able to actually build exactly on that moment the kind of storytelling that Lena and I both were proposing to do in the world. And as that was happening in that moment, it was a very powerful shared moment. And then this diagram jumped into my head, in which I've modeled the exercise 1, the exchange of these 2 stories between Lena and I, which produced the seed of relax, empower, and trust. And then in the second exercise, that seed triggered an acknowledgement of the seed and then some tentative ideas about what it might mean, and then very much like that seashell and the spirals that David and the crew demonstrate, the path towards the next steps and how we might practice applying those seeds in round one of the future began to unfold. And we were able to bring in some of the other elements of true storytelling, like place and process and plot and timing and staging and framing and supporting and reflecting. All of those things began to unfold in a tentative storyboard that Lena and I were both developing on the fly about our future interventions. And then the idea would be that the next phase, future two, would be after conducting that storyboarding, true storytelling effort with the seed, that we would come back and tell a story about trying to use that story in a certain way. And that this story would be the report that we would share with each other next week. And this is part of that, is sort of my commitment to describing that process and showing how it connects to that spiral nature of stories that unfold and develop in real time when people engage in true storytelling in the moment, where we're open to those kinds of possibilities. So this really produced some powerful moments of insight for Lena and Patricia and I wanted to document that as part of the routine process of the true storytelling workshop and the kinds of insights that all of us in the large group were acknowledging were happening in our lives in real time. And that was kind of a spectacular yet reassuring experience to hear how many of the other pairs and trios were experiencing similar breakthrough moments in what is a deceptively simple approach, but which, because of its authenticity and power, is connected to the essential ideas of true storytelling. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it until next week. So thanks so much for listening in, and I'm happy to talk about any of this stuff with you. My email is now added to the bottom of the chart. You can see longke@yahoo.com. I'm happy to talk about that stuff. I've got other stories on youtube.com at Kennifer on numeral 8, and that's my Patreon feed for my engagement in the world. So thanks so much for your kind attention, and we'll see you next week.